Hey, what's up everyone? Rosario here and welcome back to Modern Finance. This is my new studio. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. But today we're going to talk about what's happening in the market. Let's understand, this is not a temporary sell-off. Things are going downhill fast. I'm actually quite scared, but just so you know, I'm still optimistic long term because in this video, we're going to talk about when and if you should get back into the market, and when you do, what you should buy. I know what I'm buying, but do you? I just finished reading that book right over there, and it's called Ray Dalio's The Changing World Order. Ray Dalio, if you don't know who he is, look him up. He's the founder and former CEO of Bridgewater Associates. He's a billionaire, and he's studied history in such depth and detail around finance that he has a great understanding of the economics, market conditions, and political conditions that cause societies, countries, and empires to form, thrive, grow, and crumble. And what's happening right now in the United States is unfortunately a society that's about to crumble, at least according to Ray Dalio. So, what are some of the key takeaways that I found from this book, and how can I and you apply these takeaways to our lives and making sure that we're able to weather this crazy storm that we're about to go through and that we're already in, and maybe witness the collapse of one of the longest lasting empires in human history? Let's begin. All right, so the basic gist of this book is that history is cyclical. And no, we're not talking about 5 or 10-year cycles. Those happen too, but really long-term, 75 plus year boom and bust and rise and fall cycles. And we've seen it throughout history many times with multiple empires and multiple large countries. We've seen them rise, we've seen them grow, we've seen them thrive, and we've seen them fall over and over again. And not just in the Western world. Ray Dalio has covered China as well in his book. And it's really interesting to see how these patterns of growth, inflation, and destruction continue to happen in approximately the same ways throughout history and throughout different cultures with different governments and different technologies. The reality is we're still human. So even though we have all these new systems and these new technologies, the same patterns that caused these issues in the past and caused these cycles in the past are still occurring today. So what does Ray Dalio see? How far back did he go? And what does he think is happening and what's going to happen in the next few years? To understand that, let's first look at the United States. The United States has been the dominant world power for the last 100 or so years and has existed for over 250 years. Before the United States was the world power, it was Great Britain. And before Great Britain was the world power, it was the Dutch. In this book, Dalio talks about all the ways that these powers come to be and how they rise and how these cycles are created from the people and the culture and the economy that is generated. And all of these cultures have something in common at each stage. And he actually breaks it down into 6 stages. Stage 1 is kind of the formation stage immediately after a revolution or civil war. Stage 2 is the growth phase where wealth is being created and there's lots of opportunity. Phase 3 is the boom phase, and that's where you see success of these countries. They're basically in their prime, but education and many other economic and political factors are causing the people in the country to be the happiest and the wealthiest that they've ever been. Stage 4 is where you start to see growing debt bubbles, continued success, but the country starts transitioning. Wealth gaps are starting to widen. They're becoming more and more financially successful, but we're also seeing large and growing wealth and income gaps. Stage 5 is where things start to really fall apart. And this is where Ray Dalio sees the US right now. And what things look like in stage 5 is that huge divisions arise between people and they're seemingly irreconcilable. Gigantic wealth and income gaps start to form and grow. And governments are unable to keep their hold on their reserve currency status, and the value of money in that location starts to really depreciate and evaporate. That's what we're seeing happen in the United States right now. And unfortunately, after stage 5 comes stage 6, which is essentially revolution. And so Ray Dalio's thesis in this book is essentially that we could be seeing a revolution of sorts in America over the next few years, potentially a civil war, hopefully something peaceful. Ray Dalio does thankfully highlight multiple times throughout history that these massive changes, these civil wars occurred peacefully and without actual violence. But unfortunately, it was the minority of the times that this happened. I'm a little worried about this, but is Ray Dalio right? Are we actually going through this time? Is this something that a lot of people have seen coming? And if not, why not? It's really interesting to read Dalio's book and understand that these things have happened in the past. This isn't the first time that a country's currency has inflated away. This isn't even the first time that countries have resorted to massive money printing to try and stimulate the economy. This has happened multiple times throughout history, and we can see the periods where that type of policy can succeed and where it can fail and what it leads to next. What happens after a revolution is that hard money becomes more valuable because people stop trusting a country's currency. What Dalio predicts is that potentially gold, other precious metals, and maybe even cryptocurrencies will become the default currency after this. Another possibility is that we shift to a third alternative or another fiat currency from another country. I'm going to be blunt and say this. Dalio thinks that China is the next power, and I tend to agree with him. The reality of this situation is that China is growing, and it's growing fast. And at a time when the US is considering raising interest rates to try and quell inflation, China is actually lowering interest rates. And that's because despite all their lockdowns and all their restrictions and their horrible record on human rights, China has managed to continue to grow despite the coronavirus, despite the lockdowns. Their economy is still growing. And how have they done this? It's actually really interesting to read Dalio's book, and I didn't really know or understand this, but China has been a world power and number 1 or 2 in the world in terms of economy for much of the last millennium, and even more than that. For about the past 1,300 years, China has been a world power, and only from the period of about 1850 to the 1970s was China really a secondary world power. Throughout the Middle Ages, China was much wealthier than Europe. And during the Qin dynasty, China had more technology, better education, and essentially a far more advanced economy than much of the Western world. And that was surprising to me. And I guess once you realize that, maybe it's not so surprising that China is rising now. When the Chinese people have more economic freedom, they're able to create new technologies, they're able to develop sustainable industries, and they use their Confucian mindset, which really revolves around planning and thinking about the future and planning for your family, and kind of ideologies that we don't necessarily think about so much in North America, but I think are incredibly valuable. So it's not surprising to me that China could be the next world power. They have 1.5, 1.6 billion people, and they're not growing at a fast rate in terms of population, but their economy is outpacing the United States, and it's really only a matter of time until China's the dominant world power. Is that going to come in the form of a slow, gradual economic shift away from the US and towards China? Or is that going to come in the form of war? Is there going to be conflict between America and China? I really hope for peace. I hope there's no opportunity here for bloodshed. I hope that we're able to be peaceful and, have a world that has free markets, free enterprise, free thought, free communication, education, and entrepreneurship, and where these values are highlighted and we're not so focused on who's dominant. Throughout history, there have been empires that have been violent, and there have been empires and civilizations that have been peaceful. My hope is that through this transition, if it really is happening, that anything that changes will be peaceful. But My goal is not to prevent this from happening or to encourage it or to have any influence on it at all. Really, my goal is just to continue to grow my wealth and preserve my family's freedom and separate ourselves from big challenges if this really does happen. Because obviously in revolutionary times and civil wars, sometimes people can get killed and a lot of people are hurt, and I really hope that that doesn't happen. And I want to make sure that I can protect myself and my family and protect our wealth. The good news is that Ray Dalio has a lot of insights in this book on how to do that, how you might store and save your wealth, what kind of plans to have in case this type of scenario comes to pass. But sitting here in Canada, how will Canadians be affected by this transition? It's not like we're the world power, but we are heavily dependent on the United States for much of our trade and honestly for military defense as well. So how is that transition going to impact us as Canadians? And what will America be like over the next 100 years? Will it steadily decline, or will it just grow at a slower rate? Or will America be able to retain its power and regain its economic prowess over the next 100 years? Only time will tell, but I think that it's pretty unlikely that America will be able to regain its former position without some huge changes and some huge movement away from the tyranny and increased government, basically the social welfare state that's been set up there. And it's going to require a move to more freedom, better education, more openness, and more transparency and sound money. If America does that, it's possible that this transition won't happen. Is it possible? I don't know, but I guess we're going to find out over the coming years. So sit back, stay in for the ride. For now, let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Have you read this book? What do you think of Ray Dalio? Have you read some of his other books? I think this man is a genius, and he has genius level researchers working for him. So he understands both the history of America, the history of China, the politics of America and China, and multiple other empires and countries and civilizations as they've risen and fallen throughout the last several hundred years. So if anyone stands a chance of predicting what's about to happen, I think it's him. Stay tuned, and we'll talk to you guys in the next one talking about how to buy gold. Peace.